In a previous video, I introduced you to optionals, and I basically just talked about kind of like what they are, what the syntax of it is. So just as a quick refresher, if we say we've got a resource here and we want it to be nil, then we've got to use the question mark to say that this value can be nil. Now we've called any, I haven't up until now talked about the any, but this is basically a type that can have any type, all right? And but just to reiterate this once again, is that if we just say resource is equal to any without the question mark, then at no time can this ever be nil, right? If we try and compile it, nil cannot initialize specified type any, right? So if you want something to have a value and to not have a value, then you've got to make it optional. And it always has the default value of nil. Okay, so you actually technically don't have to initialize it, but it's just good practice to initialize it. So now what you see here is I've created this function called getResource, and it takes a path, and it's just an arbitrary thing that's going to return if the resource does exist. And then this second optional parameter is going to say that it's not optional by default. And so what it's doing here is saying if it is optional, if this is true, then just return nil. Otherwise, just return the path, and that is it. And this any is just going to allow it to return anything whatsoever. So how can we use this, and what is optional binding? So as we've seen before, we could say if get resource here, and just say tester, it really doesn't matter, is equal to nil, all right? This would say that the resource was nil. Now we know this is not going to be nil because is optional is false. So this is always going to be just ignored. All right. But in this sense, we would want to check that if get resource is not equal to nil, then execute this code. But what we also want to have is the value here as well. So if we just put that there and we say get resource, and then we can change here and say if resource is not equal to nil, then execute this code. But what would be really nice if we can just do it all on one line. And we can do that. We can literally just copy it here and paste it down here and do this. This is exactly the same thing. So if let resource is equal to get resource and then path, and then say explicitly specify type, any adds an additional level here. So let's just do that as well. And okay, because get resource, if it is nil, it's never going to execute this code, which is why we can guarantee that this resource is of type any, okay? And so in here we can access resource how we choose and want to, all right? And we might get a warning here right now, but it's okay. All right, so we now know that if get resource actually is a resource, it's going to print out resource, and then in this case tester. So when we do this, we see resource is tester. Now if we copy this once again and we just say then true here to say that this is an optional here, we know we're going to get nil. And if we add an else statement here and put the print here instead, just to see both sides of it, and then we're going to say not a resource, and this resource now doesn't exist, okay, because it's not in this scope. This resource is only valid in this one scope, and we can just get rid of it because it doesn't exist anyway. So this is what basically happens is this resource here, its scope is only relative to this code block within inside of here. So it's never going to be available outside, all right? So this is going to, resource is going to be evaluated first of all, and if it is not nil, then this value of resource will be added to the scope of this one code block, and you can use it in here. Now we've said if let, so we've said that make this immutable, make this a constant, so we couldn't be able to change it. Now if we do want to be able to modify it, we can just change it to let var resource. Now we also know that get resource has a type, and so we can remove this and just allow it to do well. We've got type inference already on there on resource because we know that the method turns an any, and because we've done it in a if var or if let statement, we know that it's not optional anymore. So this is something that is really practical. what you can do. Now there are other additional steps that you can take to do this. Yeah, and you can also chain this down. Okay, so if we had another resource too, and for example we just then said if other resource is equal to get resource, and then we said then let's just do some string interpolation here, and then we say resource and other, then you can see here that this will compile perfectly fine, and it build, and we run it, and we can see that we don't immutable, we don't use it, so we don't use this other resource here. But because we know that both of them are going to return, we can put the other resource in here and run the code once again, and we can see resource tester is there, and then not a resource because we said a true here. But if we just delete that there, just to show you that we can use both of them. And now this is saying a warning because we've never changed it, so we can run it again. And you can see down here we now have access to tester and tester other, and we used this resource in this next if let statement here. So this is something really cool and clever that you can do to be able to unwrap. And we'll talk about unwrapping later on, but this is what it's called, is basically unwrapping the optional to get the actual value. And if it doesn't have a value, if one of these fails, then it won't come to this code here. So let's just put true here, so we can see that the first one passes, but the second one fails. So it shouldn't come here, and we should just get not resource on the second one. And as you can see here, that's very much true. So you can, if you have to go to the disk to get a file, and that file exists and this resource is there, then you use a reference from that one resource and then check to see whether another resource exists relative to that and that one doesn't, then we know that it will come here. Otherwise, it means you've got both pieces of information without having to worry about any part of this being nil or anything like that. So this is safe code down here. With that said, we're going to delve a lot deeper into this because this is a really super powerful thing that Swift has, and you use it all the time. And you'll be able to sometimes write a little bit more code, but your code will be even more safer than it was if you didn't write it. So you've got to get into the habit of sometimes you can use an if statement, sometimes you can use other things. I'm not going to mention them right now because they're part of other videos, and I just don't want to add any more complexity to this. But anyway, this is a really powerful tool, and you should be the first thing that you use all the time. If you know something is going to be possibly nil or possibly not have a value, you need to be thinking about the optional bindings first, and always think about optionals. Always, if you guarantee something is always there 100% of the time, you don't need optionals. But if there's a 99% or there's a 0 point something % chance that this can be nil, then always use an optional, and always use optional binding first. Okay, with that said, thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and if you do have any feedback or any questions or any concerns, then please feel free to put them in the comment section down below. Other than that, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Ciao, ciao, and goodbye.